Welcome to today's science lesson. The topic we are going to cover is kingdom cells. We had covered close to 5 kingdoms, but we are saying by merely looking the living organisms that are present in various kingdoms, we cannot just classify them using the observable characteristics that we can see and watch with our naked eyes. We need to go further so that we are able to see well these animals, how we can classify them. So we are saying, for instance, animals like dogs, mosquitoes, and jellyfish, they belong to animal kingdom. When you just see a dog, a jellyfish, and so forth, you can easily know and classify them. And also we are saying trees, we have trees like the ferns, the pine trees, and so forth. They belong to the plant kingdom. So it is easier to see these physical characteristics, and you start classifying them automatically. But we are saying, when we are talking about kingdoms like the Fungi kingdom or the Manera Kingdom or Protist, you cannot classify them because these kingdoms, the organism in this kingdom cannot be seen with the naked eye. They are unicellular. These organisms have got only one cell, which you can observe them by the assistance and the help of a microscope. So we are saying, because a closer look, if you want to classify the living organisms that we want, any new living organism, we have said we can go deeper than just considering the physical characteristics. We go deeper so that we check what are these, what substances make up these organisms in different kingdoms. And we have, when we want to check and to look what the substances that make up these organisms in their various kingdoms, then we shall have a closer look at their cells. When we look at the cells, they will assist us in being more accurate and classifying the living organisms that are present in different kingdoms. So we are saying, what are cells? We are saying all living things are made up of building blocks. These building blocks, we call them cells. So we are saying all living organisms, they are made up of these building blocks that we are calling cells. So a closer look at these cells will be able to tell us the kind of organism we are dealing with, and we can accurately classify these living organisms. So we are saying all living things, plants and animals that belong to animal kingdom, that are made up of many cells. So some organisms are made up of many cells. The organisms that are made up of many cells, we refer to them as they are multicellular. Whenever we say an organism is multicellular, it implies that this particular organism we are referring to is made up of many, many cells, that there are many cells that were combined to make up this kind of organism. So we say that it is a multicellular. Some of fungi are also multicellular, some fungi that's from fungi kingdom, but most of the fungi, we have some fungi that have got only one cell that make the entire living organism. So we are saying these fungi that have got only one cell, then we call them unicellular. So we are saying organisms that are made up of only one cell. We call such organisms that they are unicellular, meaning the whole organism entirely relies on only one cell. But we are saying there are some living organisms that are made up of many cells. These many cells is what we are calling them. They are multicellular in nature. So we are saying the cells of all living organisms have some kind of commonality, similarity. And we are saying some of these, when we have a closer look at a cell, we discover the following, that the organisms in different kingdoms they belong in, they have the following as part of their characteristics when we observe this cell under the use of a microscope. We say all cells, these cells, the cells of living organisms have parts in common. Some of the common parts are one cell membrane. So we are saying a cell contains a cell membrane, whether that cell is from plant kingdom or from animal kingdom and so forth. So when you observe it through a microscope, you will discover that it has a cell membrane. And what is this cell membrane? It is the skin that holds the cell together. So we are saying, what is the cell membrane? We are saying it is a kind of a skin that holds the cell together. It holds the cell together. So that's one of the common characteristics that runs across all cells in different kingdoms they are. And then we are saying another common feature again among the cells in all the kingdoms, in all the living organisms, all the kingdoms, the cells have nucleus. All the cells have nucleus. What are nucleus? We say the nucleus, they are the control center of these cells. We are saying the nucleus are the control center. The nucleus is the control center of that particular cell. So if you have the cell, we shall have a structure of a cell, and then we shall see where the nucleus is located. In most of the plant cells, they are located almost in the middle of the cell, but we shall see when we draw a structure. We are saying another common characteristics that is evident among all the cells, whether this living organism is in the plant kingdom, animal kingdom, or a fungi kingdom, they have a substance called cytoplasm. So each cell has a cytoplasm. And what is a cytoplasm? We say a cytoplasm is a watery or a jelly-like mixture that contains smaller parts within them, cytoplasm. So if, for instance, if we are talking about the plant cell, you'll find that some of the cytoplasms, okay, they contain water or a jelly or like mixture that contains many smaller parts within them. But we are saying, however, not all the cells are the same. When looked through a microscope, the differences can be seen. And from the differences that can be seen when we are having a closer look at the cells, these differences can be used to classify this particular organism in the various kingdoms. Now, we are saying how the organisms feeds is another characteristics that can be used when we are trying to separate organisms in different kingdoms. For instance, we have the main characteristics of the 5 kingdoms are as follows. We are going to look all the characteristics as they are evident in all the 5 kingdoms, and we shall see the difference as they occur. We shall start with the animal kingdom, and then we shall see the cells in animal kingdom, what are the nature of the characteristics, then we shall have the structure of a cell in an animal kingdom, and we shall give an example of organisms that are present in this animal kingdom. Then we shall cover all the 5 kingdoms that we've seen, the characteristics of cells in all the 5 kingdoms. So we can start with the animal kingdom, so animals. Now in the animal kingdom, we want to see the nature of the cell. What is the characteristic? So we are saying when we observe under a microscope cells that are present in the animal kingdom, then these characteristics will be evident. One, animals, cells in the animals are made up of many cells. We are saying when you check animals, they are made up of many cells, not only one cell, but it is animals are multicellular organisms. So we are saying animals are made up of many cells. Their cells have membrane. So one obvious characteristics of a cell, an animal cell, they have a cell membrane. And secondly, this cell membrane forms a boundary. The cell membrane forms a boundary of that particular cell, and within it, the cell has a nucleus, and the cytoplasms are also within the cell. So we are saying animal cells, they are able to obtain their energy by feeding on other animals or on other living things. So we are saying when you look closer at the cell, you find that this cell, it has a cell membrane. A cell in the animal kingdom has a cell membrane. And we have said a cell membrane is the outer covering of a cell. Then from there we have said the cell has nucleus. The nucleus that within the central points of that particular cell, they control the activities. Then lastly, we have said they have cytoplasm, and we say these cells, they gain their energy when this particular animal or organisms feeds on other living organisms. We shall have a structure so that at a glance we can have a structure that can be able to give these characteristics that we are saying. So we are saying an animal cell can acquire the following shape. This is an example of a cell. Under a microscope, you can see something like this. The black dot that I've shown, that one can represent the nucleus. That is the nucleus. And then the outer covering that we are showing here, this one will represent the cell membrane. That is the cell membrane. And then when you look closely, so the cytoplasms are the small dots that are being seen. This one, we can make nucleus a bit larger than what we are calling this one are the cytoplasm. So this is an example of an animal cell. So if you observe an animal cell using a microscope, you will see nature of such a cells. The cells will be having the nucleus, they will be having the cell membrane, and the cell membrane, we have said, it is an outer covering of that particular cell, and it has the cytoplasm. What are examples? The appropriate examples of this animal cell, then we can get them for instance, animals that we can find they fall within the animal kingdom. We have birds like the pelican bird, we have frog. So their cells will display such a characteristics. The frogs, human beings, humans, we have humans here, and even jellyfish. They belong to this category. And now we have seen the nature of an animal cell. We want to see what about the structure and the structure of a plant cell. How does a plant cell look like? What are the differences between a plant cell and an animal cell? So when you look plants that are present and in the plant kingdom, we say plants are made up of many cells. So we are saying plants are multicellular. Their cells have a cell wall. That's a major difference between the plant and the animal. So we are saying some of the obvious characteristics when you look through a microscope, you will find the following characteristics. One, we are saying when you observe that particular plant cell, it will have a cell wall. This was absent when we were looking the structure of an animal cell. So it has a cell wall. Apart from the cell wall, it has now the cell membrane. So there is a cell membrane. Then we are saying the cell wall helps to support the structure of the plant so that it supports the structure and the structure of the plant so that the cell becomes stable. So we are saying the cell will help to support the plant and give it its shape. Many plant cells also contain structures called cytoplasm. So apart from the cell membrane, we have the cytoplasm. And within the cytoplasm are also within the cell. And this structure called the cytoplasms, they contain chemicals called chloroplasts. So this cytoplasm, they contain a chemical called chloroplast. Within this chloroplast, they have a chlorophyll, which gives the particular plant a green color. That green color enables the cell of a plant to trap energy, to trap light from the sun, change it into energy, and be able to manufacture its own food in a process called photosynthesis. So we are saying, using the chemicals that are available in the chloroplasts, the plant cell is able to manufacture its own food, so that when it combines with the carbon dioxide, then we get the byproduct like water and oxygen and so forth. So it is able to manufacture its own food, and these food are translocated in different parts of the plant. So we are saying we want to see a closer look of the structure of a plant cell. A plant cell has the following shape. Now, if we have to remember, we said that the major difference that is there between the animal cell and the plant cell, the plant cell has got what we call the cell wall. So we are saying outside here we have the cell wall. Then the line within is the cell membrane. So the cell wall is there to protect the cell membrane so that it gives the plant the support and the shape. Now that is the cell membrane, and then something else. We have this black dot represents the nucleus. And then what I've drawn these ones is they represent the chloroplasts. These chloroplasts, they contain chlorophyll. They contain chlorophyll, and we have said that the chlorophyll is the one that gives that green color to the plant. Apart from that, so we can see that the major difference that is there between a plant cell and an animal cell, we can find that in a plant cell we have a cell wall that gives particular shape to that tree, to that particular cell. And we are saying they also have chloroplast, and these chloroplasts, they help the plant because they have chlorophyll, which is a clean coloring matter that enables the plant to manufacture its food. Examples of plants in the plant kingdom, we can have grass. So the cell of a particular grass will take this shape. We also have the gum tree. The gum tree, their cells will take that particular shape. And we have another plant called the mosses. So when we observe their cells of these particular plants, they will have their cells will take that structure. Now we are through with the cells in the plant kingdom. We can now go to another kingdom called the Protist. We observe the nature and the characteristics of the cells in the Protist kingdom. Now, cells, the living organisms that are present within the Protist kingdom, when you observe them closely, they are going to show the following characteristics. The protists are single-celled organisms, so we are saying organisms under that kingdom, they are single-celled, they are made up of only one cell. So there's no way you are going to observe through the microscope 1 or 2 or 3 cells. No, we are saying organisms in the Protist kingdom, they are made up of only one cell, so they are single-celled organisms. Protist cells may be plant-like or animal-like. They fall in between when you are trying to observe them through the microscope. So we are saying their characteristic, the major characteristic, they have got only one cell. Maybe if we have to draw a structure that will show clearly how you can be able to identify that this is a protist cell that you are observing under a microscope, then it will take the following format. That's the nucleus. Those tiny dots, they represent chloroplasts. The tiny dots represents the chloroplast. So this, from a microscope, this is the structure of a cell that is from the Protist kingdom. So organisms in the Protist kingdom, when you observe their cells, they have such a structure. So we are saying some of the living organisms that they have such a structure in this Protist kingdom. We have the Protozoa. We have the Protozoa, and another organism in the Protist is the algae. So when you observe algae or a Protozoa, when you observe it closely, you will find that the characteristics that we'll be able to see, the plant cell, their cells will be of such structure. Now, we have covered cells that are present in the Protist kingdom. We have said Protist kingdom, they are unicellular, they are single-celled organisms. Now, we can go ahead and see another kingdom characteristic. We can see the fungi kingdom, so that we see the characteristics that are present in the cells that make up the fungi kingdom. The fungi can be made up of many cells. So if the fungi are made up of many cells, they are multicellular. At the same time, the fungi, organisms in the fungi kingdom can be made up of only one single cell. So those fungi that are made up of one single cell, they are unicellular. The cells in fungi have a cell wall. The cell in fungi kingdom, they have a cell wall, and they do not contain chloroplast. Fungi feed mostly on dead materials from other living organisms. So we are saying the major characteristics of fungi. One, we are saying we have some organisms in the fungi kingdom that are multicellular. Then we are also said some organisms in the same fungi kingdom are unicellular. They are unicellular, meaning they are made up of only one cell. And we are saying that when you look about the cell, we are told the cells, when you look at the cell, the cell, it contains the cell wall, yes, but they do not have the chloroplast because they don't manufacture their own food, but they depend on other dead materials. They feed mostly on dead materials. So the structure of a cell in this particular fungi kingdom can take the following structure. Okay, so nucleus is not located in the middle, located anywhere. This is the nucleus. Then we have the cell wall. We have the cell wall, and within cell membrane. You can see it has a cell membrane, cell wall, a cell membrane. So we are saying fungi, just like cells in the plant kingdom, they have a cell wall, which is absent in the animal, from organisms that are present in animal kingdom. Then we are saying the fungi cell, they don't contain chloroplast. If they had chloroplast, they will have that ability of making their own food. So because they cannot produce their own food, then they feed on dead animals, dead organisms and dead animals, so that they, and other living things. So this is the structure and nature of a cell. When you observe through a microscope, this is how a cell from the fungi kingdom looks like. Examples of organisms that their cells can take this nature. we have the molds. So the molds can take that nature. We have the yeast. Yeast, you can be able to say the actions and the characteristics of yeast, but you cannot use your naked eyes to see yeast. They are so tiny. And then they are unicellular, in fact. Then we also have the mushrooms. So when you observe cells of mushrooms, then they will take such structure. Now we can go to the fifth kingdom and see how their cells are when you observe through a microscope. The fifth kingdom is Manera Kingdom. Now, when you observe organisms in the Manera Kingdom, their cells will have the following characteristics. One important characteristics on Manera, organisms in Manera Kingdom, they are single-celled organisms. So we are saying organisms in Manera Kingdom, they are made up of only one cell, not two or three, just one cell. So they are so tiny you cannot see them with your naked eyes. Their cells have a cell wall. So they have a cell wall. Apart from having a cell wall, they do not have clearly defined nucleus. That is what differentiates the Manera Kingdom from all other kingdoms the four kingdoms you have seen. They do not have a clearly defined nucleus. And we shall see this when we have the structure of a cell from this kingdom, the Manera Kingdom. So when you observe under a microscope, the cell will take the following structure. Now, the outer covering is the cell wall. Then from the cell wall, we have the inside covering, the cell membrane. Yes, and then when now it comes to the nucleus, when it comes to nuclear, when it's observed, we have such a structure that is in between, which we cannot classify as nuclear completely. So we are saying when it comes to whether the nucleus is present within the Manera Kingdom, the organism in the Manera Kingdom, they fail to show clearly whether there is a nucleus within them. But this is the structure. So we are saying organisms that elicit such a kind of characteristics. We have the bacteria. Bacteria fall under this structure. So we have the bacteria and the cyanobacteria that when you look their cells, they show such a kind of characteristics. Before proceed, we can have slightly an exercise that will assist us to see whether we can remember and recall simple information. We can have the following study question, and the three questions. Question number 1E. Describe the problems. Describe one problem and one benefit of fungi. Describe one problem and one benefit of fungi. So describe one benefit and describe one problem and one benefit of fungi. To approach such a nature of a question, because they just want one problem, any one problem that you will be able to mention, then it will be okay. So what the major problem that is caused by fungi, we are told the fungi, they cause diseases. We have what we call fungal infections. When people have fungal infections, they have to attend to hospitals, given medicine so that they are treated. So that one can be a problem. You're saying fungi can cause diseases, then it can cause this, what we call fungal infections. Apart from that, we say most things that decaying that we see around, it is normally caused by attack by fungi. That can be a problem. Then benefits. What are the benefits of fungi? Fungi, we are told the major benefits, they are able to break down waste products into nutrients. And when waste products are broken down into nutrients, they are able to go back to the soil. The soil is able to absorb these nutrients, and the soil is fertile. It can support other plants that require to grow. So major benefit of fungi is they are able to break down the waste materials, waste products into nutrients, and nutrients are able, they are absorbed by plants, and trees again, they're able to grow. So the soil becomes very fertile. That's a major benefit of fungi. We can go to question number 2. Number 1B. Question number 1B. Identify the main differences between organisms that are unicellular and those that are multicellular. Identify the main differences between organisms that are multicellular and those that are unicellular. Identify the main differences between organisms that are multicellular, and those that are unicellular. And those that are unicellular. Now, when we look the nature of this question, it requires you to mention differences that are there between organisms that have got only one cell and organisms that are made up of many cells. To approach these questions, the difference is the unicellular organisms, they have got only one cell, forming the entire body of that living organisms. And that's one difference. They are made up of only one cell, and that is one cell that entirely makes up the whole body. Then the second, another notable difference is you cannot see these unicellular organisms with naked eyes. You require a microscope for you to be able to observe organisms that are made up of only one cell, single cell, the unicellular organisms. And if we talk about the multicellular organisms are made up of many cells. And that one, if they're made up of many cells, you can be lucky, you can be able to see them with your naked eyes. For instance, if we can give an example of organisms that are multicellular, and you can see them with your naked eyes, we can give an example of mushrooms. Mushrooms are made up of many cells, and you can be able to see them with your naked eye. Let us go to question 1C, and it will be the last question so that we continue. Question 1C. Question 1C. List. It is a question that requires you to remember, to record. List the kingdoms with single-celled organisms. List the kingdoms with single-celled organisms. Yes, list the kingdoms with the single-celled organisms. So if you had been paying a lot of attention, this is a matter of remembering and recalling. So we had mentioned earlier that the kingdom called Monera, and Protist. The kingdom Monera and kingdom Protist, the organisms within those two kingdoms, they contain one cell. They are unicellular, they are single-celled organisms, and that is an appropriate answer. Now, what we want, we have gone ahead, we have seen that the physical attributes that we see with our naked eyes, the feeding system of an organism and so forth, that one enough cannot be sufficient for us to classify such animals. We have to go further, we check and we look through a microscope to see the nature of their cells that make up these different organisms in their various kingdoms. So we are saying when it comes to classifying, then we have to see this particular animal or these particular organisms and give it a name. So when you are giving it a name, you are doing what you are giving it a name. If the scientists will always, when the scientists are giving the name, then it's a bit different. They're giving it a scientific name. But what about local people? People who are not scientists. They can have many names referring to same organisms, depending on the many languages are there. We have many tribes, and you can find that these many tribes, they have got maybe one organism and they're giving them many names. Now this can give a confusion. If you have a particular organism and you have different names referring to a particular organism, then it will be very hard for people to discuss, to know that you are talking about these particular organisms. So scientists came up with a formula to ensure that they have got only one way of naming this animal, so that it has got single name and the scientists can be able to know that they are talking about a particular animal. So we have what we call common names. Now, common names, these are normal names that are not scientists. People, commoners, will come up and give the name of a particular animal. So the common names, you can find one organism has got many names depending on the regions that this particular organism is present. So one organism that has several names, which at times it confuses people, scientists came up with a particular way of having a single name for each organism. And we are saying this way of giving it a single name is called, giving it a single name is known as scientific name. So if an organism has got a single name that can be understood by all scientists coming from different areas of the earth, then that name that we have given it, if it is single and it talks about that particular animal, then we say it is a scientific name. So we have common names that can bring confusion, but we have scientific names. So we are saying scientific name, there's a process, there is a way that you give scientific names. Scientific names will actually identify a particular organism and it cannot be confused with another. We can have an example of an organism called Micropus robustus. Now, we are saying a process of having a scientific name. There are rules that guide us when we are giving scientific name to a particular organism. There is a scientist who came up called, we shall see him later on, called Lillian. This scientist came up with a scientific name of giving names to animals. He ensured that he was using the first name had to start with a capital letter, but the second name had to take, they had to take the lowercase. They had to start with a small letter. So they felt that instead of giving names to a particular animal, describing its nature and the physical characteristics, you will find that one organism, you can describe it with 9 to 10 words. The names, for instance, if we give, for instance, a dog, and then we say maybe a dog is a canine, but there are various kinds of dogs will come. How will you continue to differentiate these dogs? You will say this is a dog with a black tail, another one with a white tail, and so forth. It can confuse. But there is a scientist who came up with a scientific way of giving names, and that way it is simplified the process of giving names to the organisms that are found within the kingdoms. So for you to come up with the structure of giving names, this scientist, he was a Swedish scientist. He saw there was a need of standardizing names. So when this Swedish scientist called Carl Linnaeus we are told a scientist by this name, Carl Linnaeus, is a Swedish scientist. He collected a number of plants, close to 1,000 plants that were unique and new. And he saw that the way, if you decide to describe it, you can end up having very many words trying to describe a particular plant or a particular organism. So he came up with a standardizing name. He came up with a formula that we can use and simplify the way you can give names to these animals. So we are told this Swedish scientist, he lived between the year 1707 to 1778. This scientist who came up with standard names for different living organisms, he lived in 1707 to 1778. And at first he used to describe the nature of the organism that he wanted, but he discovered more description. You will find that we are describing one particular organism using very, very many words, which it can be cumbersome. So when he gave, for instance, he came up with he discovered that if you continue describing, then the description will become even longer if the animals from the same species show up. So he came up with, he gave an example of a scientific name, Canis. Let us use Canis. This one refers to a dog, the canine, but he came up with the scientific name Canis. It's a part of a scientific name that refers to a dog. And from the descriptions, a canine, it has the teeth. If a new species of a dog is discovered, then you will find that if you had given a dog a similar name, Canis, then how are you going to name also another dog that resembles it? So he found that he will use a lot of words to describe one thing. Maybe this a dog that is within Canis that is present at homes, Canis that is present maybe in the woods and so forth. So we'll find that we are using a lot of words. So he came up with a better system of naming. He organized classification of organisms into hierarchy, with the kingdoms at the top and then species at the lower level. We are told at the lower level we had the genus. These are the kingdom will be at the top. So for instance, we talk of an animal kingdom. Animal kingdom, for instance, shall use phyla. Phyla will be at the top. The phylum will be at the top. In case of plants, we shall use division. So division will be at the top. But when we go down at the lower level, where we shall have species and genus, that one will be the lower level. So I'm saying a genus is a name given to the lower level of. A genus is a name given to an organism that is above the species. We can take species to be the last one among the hierarchy, so that above the species we have the genus, and then above the genus we can go to families, and then order, then to phylum, and then we reach the division, and then phylum, and then we reach the kingdom, the plant kingdom, and so forth. So we are seeing that. So he came up with a system that each organism, instead of having a lot of words that we can use to describe them, he said we can only use 2 words to describe. We can use the genus of that particular organism and the species to describe that particular living organisms. And when he came up with this system, then this system is normally known as the binomial naming, because you are giving the living organisms 2 names. So binomial naming is also called binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is a system of identifying an organism using 2 names, considering the genus of that particular animal and the species. So, and they said when a spoken language, if you use a spoken language, it was discovered that spoken language, when people speak, the words tend to change after some time. So they said if we use a spoken language when it comes to naming particular organisms, then it will be difficult because this spoken language will change after some time. They discovered that Latin language was the most appropriate to use when you are giving names to this animal, because Latin language is mostly written and not spoken. That was one of the reasons they gave why they were using Latin language in Europe. Latin language was available, it was known by most educationists. Many people who were educated, they were able to learn, they knew Latin language, but Latin language was not being used as a spoken language. So they said we can use Latin language when it comes to binomial nomenclature, when we are giving and classifying animals, giving these animals 2 names. So we are saying binomial nomenclature is now used internationally. That is, scientists in different nations, wherever they are, they know the language of giving and identifying organisms using 2 names, giving the name, the species, and the genus of particular animals. So 2 names are normally used when it comes to binomial nomenclature. Regardless of the language spoken in the country, organisms and scientists, they've agreed in a system of giving names to this particular animal. And you'll find that the scientific name that is given to a particular animal will withstand, wherever you go, you'll find the name will still be the same. So we have said this system has been used for giving names to plants since 1753. So this system of binomial nomenclature, identifying a particular living organism. If it's a plant, you are giving it two names. We are told it has been in place since 1753. And then 1758 is when now it was also used to give names to animals. So animals were also binomially identified. They were given two names in 1758. This system later on was also agreed, it was identified, it was agreed, and they started using binomial nomenclature to give names to bacteria from the year recently a bit, 1980. 1980 is when binomial nomenclature was used to give names to bacteria that are present, that were discovered by the scientists and so forth. So one thing we can talk about scientific naming, we shall see an example, that you have species in the same order, but when you give it names, it can be able to identify that this particular organisms is different. For instance, where we know when we talk of organisms being in the same species, well, they will resemble, but they will not be replica. They cannot be the same. Even if we give an example of human beings, when we give an example of human beings belong to the same species, but they are not alike. They are different. They're human beings, yes, but they are not replica or a duplicate to another. They are a bit different when you're talking about human beings. So this scientific naming, we know they give two names. Now, when a scientist discovered a new organisms, they observe carefully and they describe it. They look for ways it is similar to other species. So we are saying whenever a scientist discovers a new organisms, he will observe that particular organisms closely so that he can describe the characteristics that are observable. Then he will also look at that particular organisms and see whether it is similar to other species. And then he will decide which group it belongs. So you have to observe a particular organisms, look at the characteristics that are present, and then decide, is it also similar to some species? If it is similar, then you will start classifying it. So we are saying once the name has been given to, the name will be used by all other scientists all over the world describing that new organisms that were discovered by these scientists. So we are saying name given to a new organisms, that new organisms is the name is not just given randomly. No, names are not given randomly. So the taxonomists use binomial nomenclature when they're doing their naming system. They give every species a unique. They give two parts of a name, and in the first part of that name, they will use, it will be a genus, and the first part will be a genus, and then the second part of the part of the name will be the species. We shall see an example how they do this. For instance, when names are typed, if you are typing and the name you are typing is a scientific name, then you will start with a capital when you are typing the generic name, the genus name, but when you are typing the species name, then you will use lowercase. It will be the lowercase. When you are starting, you will start with a capital letter when you are typing the genus, but when you are typing the second name, the second part of that name, you will use a small letter. We shall have an example so that we understand what is happening. But if you are writing, you will have to underline to ensure that whatever you're writing is a scientific name. Let us give an example of Let us give an example of animals that we know. For instance, we can give an example of Panthera. Now, Panthera, that's the genus of that particular organism. And then we say Panthera leo. Let me write the following so that we know what it is. This Panthera leo is a scientific name of a lion. So when you start writing the scientific name, you start with the P, the italic, it will show. The P is capital followed by small letters, but when you are writing the second name, which is the species, this letter has to be small letter, Panthera leo. So if you are typing, we are saying these letters, you type them in italic. The first one, you start with the capital letter. The second one, you will start with the small letter. So we can say Panthera leo, it is a scientific name of a lion. We can use the same, we can pick on same other organisms that belong to the same kingdom, and still they have, they are in the same species, but they are different. For instance, you can, they belong to the same species. We can have Panthera tigris. Now, Panthera tigris, this one, the common name of Panthera tigris is tiger. So when you talk of the common name tiger, we know it. But the scientific name of the tiger is Panthera tigris. And we can have another one like the leopard, because it's the same species, with the same family, the cat family. We can have the leopard. Leopard is Panthera onca. This one means leopard. The common name is leopard. So we are saying, although they belong to the same genus, but the species are different. We are seeing the differences there. We can also have another example, Panthera paradus. And when we are Panthera paradus, we know this animal as the panther. That is the common name. All these animals, they have the same part of the name. They are in the same genus, but if you observe them, they are similar to one another. If you observe a tiger is similar to a lion and so forth, they are similar to one another. However, they are not from the same species. When you go to the species, they're different. But when you go to the genus, genus is the same. They belong to the genus, that is the Panthera. All these Pantheras are genus, but when you go to species, you find we have Leo, Tigris, Onga, and Paradus. That one differentiates them. Familiar animals can be recognized. We can recognize familiar animals with the common names, e.g., a lion, a leopard, tiger, a jaguar. By common names, you can be able to recognize them. We shall end the lesson here, but the next lesson we shall be dealing with levels of classifications. Levels of classifications. So in the next lesson, we shall deal with the levels of classification. That's the end of the lesson. Thank you.